Welcome to the Mom and podcast. We're your hosts, Suzanne Kearns
and Missy Stevens. We want to help you through everything that happens in the ellipses, from your professional life to your emotional health.
You're a mom and so much more. Let's figure out what comes next together. Welcome to the Mom and podcast. Before we start today's show, we would like to let you know that there is a trigger warning around eating disordered thoughts and behaviors, as well as self-harm and cutting. Today's episode is part 2 of our discussion with Shannon Rafalowski from episode 22, when Shannon joined us to talk about defining our values and the mind-body connection. Our conversation went beyond those topics to include some discussions about eating disorders and cutting behaviors. If you or someone you know needs help, you can find links in the show notes to some resources that Shannon shared with us for the National Eating Disorders Association, as well as an overview of cutting and a resource for caregivers. Because we didn't realize this would be a 2-part interview when we recorded it, it will start out without our typical introductions, and we'll wrap up without our usual Look, Listen, Learn segment. If you haven't listened to episode 22, we highly recommend downloading it as soon as you're finished with this one to get the complete picture of our discussion. Thank you for listening, and here's the show.
Our guest today is Shannon Rafalowski. Shannon is a transformation leader dedicated to helping women recovering from body image issues, eating disorders, and perfectionism by aligning mental and physical self-care. She gets people off that hamster wheel of shame and into a space where they can find truth, freedom, and connection for a fully authentic, passionate life. Welcome, Shannon.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here and to have a fantastic conversation with both of you.
Yes, I'm so excited. Well, I've heard a lot about you through Missy, but for others like me who don't know quite as much about you, can you give us a little Shannon 101?
So when my niece was 21, my niece was diagnosed with leukemia. She's now 27, so I guess 6 years ago. And when my niece was diagnosed, it hit me like a ton of bricks. So we've always been really close. She's my oldest niece, and it was like my heart stopped beating. And I sat back and I took a really strong look at my life, and I thought to myself, you know what? My niece has this disease and she could potentially die. And I have a choice to live or die, because I had been living with an eating disorder for 36 years from the time that I was 12 years old. It was something that many people knew about, but it was also very hidden. You couldn't tell because I've always been an esteemed athlete. I always looked like I had everything put together, you know, the beautiful house, the beautiful kids, the beautiful husband, and everything just looked perfect. But what people didn't know is that I was freaking dying on the inside, because I was always trying to keep up to not only societal standards, but my own standards of achievement and striving and striving and striving for more. And it was just never, ever good enough. Maybe for other people, but certainly not for me and the standards that I'd put on myself. But those standards really also come from society. So as I looked around and I started healing, I just was really intentional and very present and very aware of what was going on. And I had known that my eating disorder was never about food, where a lot of people will think is about food and size. For me, it was never about food. It was an addiction that was a coping mode to numb me out for me not living the way that I wanted to live. I was living for the sake of other people. I was living for how I thought I should be living. And I was just drowning out my emotions. I don't know if you've ever read any Brene Brown, but I was not, yeah, right? Like, I'm just amazing, right? So if the guests haven't read any Brene Brown, like, pick up any of them. My favorite one to start with is Gifts of Imperfection.
Yep.
And when I picked that book up, I was like, I don't know if I cuss on this show, but anyway,
go for it.
Shit. Like, shit. Like, this is it, like, in a good way and in a gut punch way. Yeah. So I thought to myself, I have got to do something. And I've always known that it, like I said, it was never about food, but I've looked for clarity my whole life on like how to heal. Even I have even spoken to crowds and spoken to middle schools before I got my life coach certification about this isn't about food. We're all made differently. We have different DNAs. This is how God made us. Let's, embrace who we are. And all of that is so great. It's like somebody saying like, life is great once you find your purpose. And you're like, okay, awesome. But tell me how to do it, right? So I kind of pick up on that journey, and I pursued my life coach certification. And when I went on that journey, I was like, oh my goodness, this is it. This is the healing pattern. And this is exactly what it takes to heal from addiction. Number one, the antidote of addiction is connection. And I was making these really solid, vulnerable, open, like deep connections with people in this coaching community that I had never felt before. And then once I started to reveal who I was that had been missing for so many years, then all of the layers like an onion just started to peel away. So really unbelievable, because what happens so many times when people are treated with eating disorders is that they treat the symptom without treating the cause, because the symptom is the eating disorder. It's either the binge eating or the not eating or the binging and purging or using laxatives or only eating the healthiest foods is also an addiction, and not eating anything else or counting calories. But those are all symptoms of something else. And so many people think that it's control, and it's really not control. I can't think of anything more out of control than thinking about food all the time. And that's the symptom, but that's the numbing or the coping to avoid what people feel is actually worse. Whatever that limiting belief is, or the almighty gremlin of I'm not good enough, or I'm not good enough to show up in my own true skin that was given to me by God or the universe, or however you want to look at that. So I went down the path of obtaining my life coach certification, and it has been the most incredible journey, helping people either heal from addiction as they're recovering from addiction, or just as finding who their true self is, so that they can genuinely shine as who they're really truly meant to be, and really embrace and feel comfortable, just showing up as who you are. And then where the fitness piece fits in is that, like I was saying, I've always been an esteemed athlete, and my sport of choice has always been swimming. And that has been a place where I have found my peace and serenity. It wasn't about, losing weight or looking good, but that's just like where I found that's like my meditative state. And that's where I've found my peace, my community, my connections, and also a big piece of my health.
Yeah.
You know what? I do not know how to swim. You two are going to have to.
Wait, you don't know
me.
how?
I don't know how to swim.
I should not sound so surprised. Lots of people don't know how, but I just didn't know that about you.
Yes, I do.
How did I not know that?
I can teach anyone how to swim.
Yes,
okay. Okay. You're up for a big challenge. A lot of people have tried, but the last time I tried, I was pregnant with Zoe. So that was 16 years ago. Yeah. I mean, I can kind of get from point A to point B, but I have a lot of issues with face in the water and that type of thing. So yes.
Well, I have one of the certifications that I have, and I don't have it written down anywhere, but it's called ALTS. It's Adult Learn to Swim Program.
Oh my gosh.
It is a certification that helps people that are even scared of putting their face in the water, or maybe they've had some sort of trauma around water, but helps people get from that state of fear and into the water just one step at a time, so that you can unleash that fear and learn how to swim.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's my new summer goal. That is my new summer goal.
I taught kids to swim, but I've never taught an adult to swim. I think it would be very different.
It's very different.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got a lot of issues built up. We've got a lot of years of issues to deal with. And I want to jump back a little bit to talking about helping, especially teens with eating disorders. I've been reading a lot of articles lately about how during the pandemic, it has that it's skyrocketed for especially teenage girls, which
because
having
they're
a teenage
sitting
girl.
scrolling the TikTok. And
Yeah. Well, I think it's that. Well, that's the other thing. So now I'm getting worried because I also think there's a bunch of teenage girls' moms who are now talking a lot about, oh, the pandemic weight. And especially now that we're all getting out for the summer. So we're
Yeah.
just going to be saying things that are exacerbating things that they're already thinking. And
Yeah.
but kind of like you were saying, it's not necessarily a weight issue, but they've also got the compounding factors of, being out of control, having this year been such a weird, complicated, confusing place. So I just feel like there's this horrible overlap of all of these danger signs of things. I'm just, I hadn't planned on getting into this because we talk more about the moms, but I'm like, things that we can be doing as moms
Yeah.
to make sure that we are not layering on any additional triggers or issues that they internalize, but also maybe warning signs or things that we can be
Yeah.
looking out for proactively.
Yeah, absolutely. Having two teenage girls, girls are identical twins that are going into high school. So I'm seeing all of the effects firsthand. And I was talking with a therapist not too long ago, and we were talking about this. And this also started even before the pandemic. Like these kids are under so much pressure to
Yeah.
perform and to do well academically and to do well in sports. And I know that there's kids that were doing sports that have had their sports things interrupted with COVID, and now they're not doing sports.
Yep.
And there is so much pressure on them to perform in all different ways. And because there was pressure on them before, now they feel like they're falling short and they're letting people down, whether it's themselves or their parents. And I'm seeing the effects of it, where I see not only eating disorders, but I'm seeing kids that are cutting themselves.
Yeah.
And I always say that that cutting and bulimia are very similar. It's a lot like where you don't feel like you can open up and talk to, whether it's a parent or a peer, because there's so much judgment, especially in that age group. There's so much judgment. So it's almost like where you're like swallowing your emotions. And I feel like this is what happens when people are binge eating, and whether they're purging or they're not, or if they're not eating, but either they're just keeping their emotions out or they're swallowing their emotions. And then when they can't hold it in anymore because you don't feel like you didn't talk to anyone, it's letting your emotions out by purging. And I feel like the same thing is what happens with cutting. It's a release. It's a feeling. And that's the thing. Like feelings are for feeling, right? And so if you're not letting yourself feel, then it's manifesting itself in another way. And whereas an eating disorder might start off first as I want to be skinny, it then exacerbates itself into a coping mode. All of a sudden, it's like alcohol, where it is like drowning you out. So all of these addictions are very similar to each other, and it's just whatever form that it happens to take. So a lot of teenage girls will turn to something like food or an eating disorder. And I don't want to single boys out either, because it is more rampant in boys, and especially like boys that either are in like wrestling or gymnastics or in the gay community, definitely. And it is more rampant in boys and men than people would ever imagine. There are signs to be aware of. Some of that can be like sneaking food, or being in the bathroom for a long time, or unexpected visits to, if your child's driving, to fast food places, But it is kind of that, it's very, very shameful, which is why people don't talk about it. It's hidden and it's shameful. So going back to Brene Brown, there's so much shame and there's so much hiding, and there's so much of a downward spiral into shame being I am bad instead of I did something bad, that people just get stuck there, and it happens over and over and over again and becomes a habit. And so, like you were saying, that you'll hear moms or dads or, family members talk about like, oh, like you really put on that freshman 15, or you got the COVID-19 going, or the comparison of like, oh my gosh, this bathing suit really fit me last year and it didn't, this year. And one of the things in my house that has always been a thing, because here I am, a mom of 3 girls, and I'm like the mom with the eating disorder has three girls, right? I mean, but one of the things from first off always is our house, the F word is not allowed in our house. And I'm not talking about the 4-letter one. I'm talking about the 3-letter one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not allowed. I mean, we don't brush over things, in avoidance, but it's not talked about in a way of like, does this make my butt look big? Or,
It's not tossed around casually.
Right. And how do you frame those conversations? Because of course they're hearing that elsewhere. So if they come to you and say, I wore this to school today and now I feel kind of F word in it. How do you reframe that conversation? What words do you use with them to say, this is how we're going to talk about this?
What I do, if they say I don't like how I look, I'll say, what's going on that's making you go to that place where you don't think that you're good enough? And it's more of going into the emotional side of it rather than the physical side of it, because the mind and the body is all connected, right? So this is where it goes into like the exercise piece too, is like the mental and the physical is all connected. So we are a soul and a body. We're not a body and a soul. So I think it's emphasizing the beauty that's from within of like what's going on in someone's heart and soul. And it's really emphasizing the strengths and not the weaknesses, playing on the strengths. It's almost like with gratitude, right? So where people are like, oh my gosh, it's raining today and I'm going to have to walk in the rain. And it's like, oh, well, wait, it's raining today and everything's going to be green from it, right? So it's looking at things from a different perspective and from a way of looking for the good rather than looking for the one thing that might be wrong. You know what I mean? Or feel wrong. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I think we all have a tendency to really zero in on whatever it is that bothers us about ourselves or about our circumstances. And if you spend too much time thinking about it, that's all you look at everything through that lens. So it's like a retraining of your brain to look at things through a different lens.
We are so mean to ourselves. Missy, we have talked about this. If we all talk to our friends like we talk to ourselves, we would have no friends. Like we would have no friends, right? Yeah. So even those types of things, like I try to emphasize those things to the girls and just say, why are you talking to yourself like that? Do you talk to your friends like that? Do you talk to your friends like that? Would you tell your friend that you look FAT? Would you say that? Right. Would you really say that if this was your friend standing in front of the mirror right now?
How are you today? Sure looking fat. You would never say that to somebody.
Yeah. Well, one of them's like, well, I'm very honest with my friends. I'm just like, well,
not that honest.
That's maybe a different conversation.
Like, all right. Like, I think, can we have a meeting? Like, do you have any friends? Yeah.
And, I think for a lot of these topics that we're talking about, one of the things that Missy has mentioned that you're very good about this process of really helping people determine their values and having those values help anchor you, whether it be in making decisions or how you treat yourself or how you live with your family. I don't mean how do you live with your family, but I mean
well, sometimes
how do you live with your family.
Sometimes.
The way in which you go day to day as a family. So, and we've talked about values a lot on the show, and I'm really curious about any nuts and bolts tips that you have for having people sit down and be able to be like, okay, yeah, this is almost like my personal mission statement or my value set. Okay. So since we have taped this entire episode, we know that it ran almost a full 2 hours. and
could probably go longer.
And so it is going to be a two-parter. And so just want to let you know, we're going to be signing off here without our look, listen, learns. And we're going to have a whole part 2 that goes into the mind-body association of health. And actually, it was the first thing to inspire me to set that alarm a little early tomorrow. So yeah, I'm going to do it. So y'all, you're going to want to make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss part 2 of our discussions. So terrific.
So much fun. So much fun. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored.
Thanks for hanging out with us this afternoon.
Yeah, so fun.
Okay. Oh, all right. It was so nice to meet you. We're going to do this again soon.
Yes, definitely. And we'll meet in person too.
Yeah, because you got to teach me how to swim.
Yes, I will too.
We're going to
we'll go swimming. We'll all go swimming. Yay!
You can all come over to my house and Shannon can teach you to swim.
I can.
We're doing it.
I'll have a cocktail, sit on the side in the shade and cheer you on.
That's right. Yeah. Support. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us for the Mom and ... podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you know someone else who could benefit from the episode, please be sure and share it with them. And while we're begging, please subscribe and rate us wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can find links to all the things we discussed today in our show notes or over at our website, momandpodcast.com, with the A-N-D spelled out. In between shows, find us over at the socials, including our private Mom and Community Facebook group. The links to that group and all of our socials can be found at momandpodcast.com. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate you more than you know. Now go out there and make your ellipses count.